to think of your grandchildren as I think of mine, I'm not entirely sure whether to be pleased or alarmed.
King Charles had faced family rebellion, public humiliation, and the crushing weight of the crown, but nothing prepared him for the words placed before him that morning. Inside a sealed legal memorandum was a decision made years earlier and protected from royal interference. The lawyer's conclusion was final. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had inherited the royal trust fortune, while the reigning king had been denied control of it completely. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained motionless as 3 senior lawyers waited across from him. The Royal Trust, a private family fortune holding investments, historic properties, jewelry, archives, and wealth separate from the crown's official assets, had always seemed destined to fall under his direction. He had never viewed it as personal spending money. To him, control meant responsibility, continuity, and the duty to protect what generations before him had preserved. The king opened the final page again. The wording did not soften. Under an irrevocable succession clause, meaning a binding inheritance instruction that could not later be cancelled or rewritten, the late queen had named Catherine as the sole principal beneficiary and future controlling guardian of the entire fortune. The sovereign could not overturn it. Palace officials could not amend it. Ordinary inheritance challenges could not touch it. His eyes stopped on her name. Charles tightened his fingers around the paper, then slowly lowered himself into the chair. His private secretary waited for an order, but none came. Silence filled the study until he finally asked for Camilla. She entered moments later and understood before he spoke. The monarch handed her the memorandum, then turned away, unwilling to let even the queen consort see how deeply the decision had struck him. Camilla read the clause twice. She saw what it meant for Catherine, but she also saw what it denied them. The lawyers explained that the princess had not yet used her authority. Even so, she could approve distributions, protect specific heirlooms, restrict access to private estates, and decide how the fortune would eventually pass to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Catherine now held power over the family's most guarded legacy, and no royal title stood above that control. The king faced the lead lawyer at last. Did my mother believe I could not be trusted with it? The man offered no comfort. He simply placed Queen Elizabeth II's signed instruction beside the memorandum, and as Charles stared at his mother's unmistakable signature, the fortune itself became almost secondary, because the people named, excluded, and protected by that decision were about to confront what the queen had truly believed about each of them. This was never merely a dispute over money. For Charles, the trust represented his mother's final measure of his kingship. For Catherine, it became a burden she had never publicly requested. For William, it threatened to reopen every buried wound between father and son. And for Camilla, the document carried a chilling implication. The late queen had constructed a future in which Catherine stood at the center, and others remained permanently outside. Charles felt the injury far beyond the fortune itself. He had spent a lifetime seeking his mother's approval, first as an uncertain heir, and later as the man expected to protect everything she had built. The crown had passed to him, yet the private legacy had not. That separation made the decision feel like a judgment, delivered after death, when he could no longer ask the queen why she had trusted his reign, but refused to place the family's deepest wealth under his control. Catherine carried a different kind of pain. The Princess of Wales, the formal title given to the wife of the direct heir, had not asked for the inheritance, helped create the arrangement, or understood the full reach of her authority before the lawyers spoke. Still, she knew how the decision would appear. To some, it would look like victory. To Charles, it could feel like replacement. William found her alone at Windsor, reading the legal summary for a second time. She did not look relieved. She looked trapped. The prince asked what frightened her most, and she admitted the fortune felt less like a gift than a command from a woman who had expected resistance after her death. William placed the document face down. He told Catherine she must never apologize for being trusted. She answered quietly that trust could divide a family just as effectively as betrayal, when only one person received it. He understood immediately. His father might see the inheritance as proof that the late monarch believed more deeply in their future than in his present reign, and that fear could turn grief into blame. Camilla discovered the truth in colder language. Her name appeared nowhere as a beneficiary, trustee, advisor, or permitted custodian. A trustee is someone legally appointed to manage or protect assets for others, and she had been denied even that limited standing. Certain collections could now be opened only with Catherine's written approval. Charles left her alone with the deed. Camilla reread the exclusion clause until surprise hardened into humiliation. The omission appeared once, then again, then in carefully repeated restrictions that made accident impossible. The final revelation cut in another direction. William did not control the trust either. Catherine had been selected independently, beyond even her husband's future authority. Then the lawyers uncovered a dated attachment linking the decision to an earlier private ceremony, and one choice she had made there. To understand why Catherine was chosen, the family would have to return to the night when one quiet act of loyalty convinced the late queen that the monarchy's private inheritance could no longer follow the crown automatically. Years before the lawyers entered Charles's study, the future of the royal trust had already been decided behind a closed door. The turning point did not come during a state banquet, a constitutional crisis, or a public scandal. It began after a private family ceremony at Windsor, when Catherine discovered an instruction that could have protected her own position, but chose instead to protect the Queen, the institution, and a young royal who never knew what she had done. Elizabeth had reviewed the trust's succession plans more than once. The royal trust was the private structure holding family wealth, protected collections, estates, and heirlooms outside the crown's official property, and the original arrangement seemed simple. Control would pass to Charles with the monarchy, then later to William. That path matched tradition, preserved order, and kept financial authority close to the sovereign. Catherine had already earned the monarch's respect through discipline, silence, and steady service, but admiration alone had never been enough to alter such a powerful inheritance. Everything changed after a private Order of the Garter family ceremony at Windsor. The Order of the Garter is Britain's oldest royal order of chivalry, a formal circle of honor led by the sovereign. When the gathering ended, Catherine found a confidential draft instruction inside a ceremonial folder left behind by mistake. The document proposed removing Princess Charlotte's future claim to a protected collection of historic jewels, so the entire inheritance could follow George's male line without complication. Catherine understood what silence could give her family. George would inherit more. Her own branch would appear stronger. No one might ever know she had seen the draft. Yet she could not accept a future in which Charlotte was quietly diminished simply because tradition found equality inconvenient. The princess went directly to Elizabeth. With no aides present, she placed the folder on the Queen's desk and pushed it away from herself. The monarch studied her before asking whether William had sent her. Catherine answered that he knew nothing. She spoke as Charlotte's mother, but also as someone who believed the monarchy's future daughters should not be treated as lesser guardians of its history. Elizabeth tested her again. She asked whether Catherine had copied the document or discussed it with anyone. The younger woman said no. Private knowledge, she insisted, should never become personal leverage. That answer changed everything. The Queen summoned her solicitor that same evening and ordered the first draft of an independent succession clause. A solicitor is a lawyer who prepares legal documents and advises clients privately. In a handwritten note later attached to the deed, she recorded her reason. The fortune required a guardian who could protect both the heir and those tradition might overlook. Charles heard the full account from the lawyers and went pale. He remembered the ceremony. He had been only rooms away, unaware that one quiet choice was reshaping the family's future. By the time Catherine was summoned to meet the king, Charles no longer wanted another legal explanation. He wanted to hear from the woman his mother had trusted above him, face to face, and without anyone standing between them. The room was cleared before Catherine arrived. No advisors, no lawyers, no private secretaries waiting beyond the table. Charles stood beside the fireplace holding the trust deed, while Catherine entered knowing that every sentence she spoke could deepen a wound she had not created. The king did not offer a greeting. He lifted the document, looked directly at his daughter-in-law, and asked the question tormenting him, "Why did my mother choose you?" Catherine did not answer at once. She knew the legal result was final, but she did not know what he wanted from her. An apology, a surrender, a confession she could not give. The trust deed was the binding document setting out who controlled the fortune and under what conditions, and every line inside it had already closed the easiest path back. Charles had spent hours turning the inheritance into a judgment on his character. He believed the Queen had trusted him with the crown, but not with the family's deepest legacy. To the monarch, that separation felt brutal. His title had given him authority over the institution, yet his mother had denied him authority over what she considered most personal. Catherine told him she had never asked to replace him, outrank him, or stand between him and Elizabeth's memory. He answered that intention changed nothing. She possessed the trust. He possessed only the knowledge that his mother had kept it from him. The accusation came harder after that. Charles said William and Catherine had allowed a second center of loyalty to grow around them, one that looked beyond his reign and toward theirs. The princess rejected it immediately. She told him that neither she nor the prince had known the final clause existed until the lawyers confirmed it. She had not built a rival court. She had inherited a burden. The king brought the deed down against the table. "Will you transfer the authority to me voluntarily?" Catherine drew a slow breath and kept her hands still. She said she could offer him consultation rights over family distributions, but she could not surrender final control simply to make the decision feel less painful. Her calmness cut deeper than anger, because it showed she believed the Queen had expected this exact pressure. Charles then revealed the threat he had been holding back. A palace advisor had identified a possible way to freeze the trust by challenging Elizabeth's mental capacity when she signed it. Such a challenge would claim that she had not fully understood the document. Catherine stared at him in horror. To attack the inheritance that way would mean attacking the late monarch's judgment in public. The argument finally broke when Charles admitted the truth. He was not only angry with Catherine, he was devastated because his mother had left him no final explanation. Lawyers had delivered her judgment after she was gone. Catherine stepped toward him, but he turned away before she reached him. The confrontation exposed the family's pain, but the next battle would not be decided by emotion, because hidden inside the trust structure was one final guardian, with the power to stop Charles or bring Catherine's inheritance to its knees. Every fortune has an owner, but the royal trust also had a gatekeeper. His name appeared only once in the main deed, buried beneath pages of succession language and sealed instructions. Sir Jonathan Harcourt, the late Queen's private fiduciary, possessed the authority to certify Catherine's control, or suspend every transfer if he believed the trust was being manipulated. Charles saw him as the last door still open. Catherine saw him as the final test Elizabeth had deliberately left behind. Sir Jonathan had spent decades handling the monarch's most private financial affairs. A fiduciary is someone legally bound to protect another person's assets and act in their best interests. And Elizabeth had chosen him precisely because he answered to the trust's purpose rather than to the palace. His role prevented any monarch, beneficiary, spouse, or court faction from quietly rewriting the arrangement once she was gone. His power was limited, but it was decisive. He could not seize the fortune, replace Catherine, or name another heir. Yet he could block transactions, investigate pressure, and suspend access if he believed the beneficiary was being forced to surrender control. Charles met him alone. The king argued that placing such wealth beyond the sovereign risked creating a rival royal household. He insisted that his concern was unity, not pride. Two centers of authority, he warned, could divide loyalties and weaken the family at the very moment it needed discipline. Sir Jonathan listened without interruption. Then he opened a private letter written by Elizabeth and told the monarch that she had anticipated that exact argument. The Queen believed unity could become a persuasive word, one powerful enough to make a future beneficiary surrender independent judgment simply to avoid conflict. Charles slid a prepared legal petition across the desk. The document asked Sir Jonathan to freeze the trust, while the palace reviewed Catherine's authority. He read the first page, closed the folder, and pushed it back without signing. The king's face hardened. The last open door had closed. Sir Jonathan remained calm, but he was not untouched. After Charles left, he stayed seated with Elizabeth's letter before him. He knew enforcing her command would deepen the grief of her son, yet ignoring it would betray the woman who had trusted him to stand firm when pressure finally arrived. The hidden protection was even stronger than Charles realized. Catherine had to be shielded from coercion during the first 30 days after confirmation. Any attempt to force a transfer would automatically activate additional safeguards. That moment had already come. Because the king had asked Catherine to surrender control, Sir Jonathan was legally required to document their confrontation and temporarily restrict palace access to sensitive trust records. The pressure meant to weaken her had instead strengthened her position and proved why Elizabeth had built the protections in the first place. By nightfall, the trust was no longer just a painful document hidden inside a study. It had begun changing who could enter, who could decide, and who would be forced to accept that the old balance of power was gone. The first consequences arrived without ceremony. No announcement echoed through the palace, and no official accused anyone of wrongdoing. Instead, permissions quietly disappeared. A private collection could no longer be opened without Catherine's approval. A family investment office stopped answering to the king's household. Then Camilla received a sealed notice informing her that her planned review of the trust's jewelry archive had been cancelled. The inheritance had moved from paper into reality. Charles watched the machinery shift around him. Trust accounts were separated from palace-managed funds. Independent staff received new reporting instructions, and confidential inventories moved into the hands of Catherine's authorized legal team. The king remained sovereign, meaning he still held the formal constitutional role at the center of the monarchy. But that authority could not reach this private sphere of family wealth. His title commanded the institution. It did not command the trust. Camilla felt the change more personally. Her scheduled examination of several historic pieces had been postponed without a new date, and the notice made clear that future access required Catherine's approval. The Queen Consort read the message while preparing for an evening engagement. She removed one earring, read the page again, and told her dresser to leave. The door closed. Camilla sat before the mirror with the second earring still on the table. She did not see a routine delay. She saw proof that Catherine now held a position Elizabeth had never allowed her to occupy. The humiliation came quietly, but it struck with force, because servants, advisors, and household officials would all understand what the cancelled appointment meant. Charles entered moments later and promised she would not be humiliated. Camilla turned toward him and asked the only question that mattered: could he reverse it? The monarch did not answer. In that silence, she understood that reassurance was the only power he had left in the room. The king carried the blame with him. His demand that Catherine surrender control had activated the safeguards, and his private anger had now produced restrictions affecting his wife, his staff, and his household. What began as grief had become consequence. William soon learned that palace officials were quietly briefing against Catherine. The prince heard through a documented internal account that advisors were describing her as eager to build an independent court. He recognized the tactic immediately. Someone was trying to turn Charles's pain into organized resistance and make the princess appear ambitious rather than burdened. Catherine then received a discovery that changed the direction of the crisis. Inside one sealed archive was a personal message from Elizabeth, addressed jointly to her and Charles. The letter could be opened only if both agreed to be present. She hesitated before telling William. The message might heal the king, or it might deliver an even more devastating judgment. With the palace dividing around them, Catherine chose not to issue another instruction or consult another solicitor. She asked Charles to meet her alone and hear the one voice both of them had been fighting to understand. There were no folders between them this time. Charles arrived alone, without a private secretary, and Catherine waited beside a small locked case containing the Queen's final message. For the first time since the inheritance was confirmed, neither stood as monarch nor beneficiary. They stood as two people bound to the same absent woman, one as her son, the other as the person entrusted with protecting what she had left behind. Sir Jonathan released the sealed message only after both signed a simple acknowledgement, confirming that they were opening it freely and without lawyers present. The note had been written after the Windsor ceremony that changed Elizabeth's view of Catherine, and it promised to explain not only why the princess had been chosen, but why Charles had been denied direct control. The private fiduciary said nothing more. He closed the case, left the room, and allowed the two people named in the letter to face its meaning alone. Catherine opened the envelope carefully. She did not begin reading. Instead, she handed the pages to the king and told him that a son should hear his mother's words first. That small act changed the mood immediately. She was not holding the inheritance above him. She was giving him the place grief had denied him. Charles read in silence. Elizabeth wrote that she had loved and respected her son, but feared the burden of the sovereign would make it impossible for him to separate family protection from institutional pressure. The sovereign is the reigning monarch, the person carrying the crown's formal authority, and she believed that power could become too heavy, even for someone acting with good intentions. She did not consider Charles unworthy. She considered the crown too powerful. The king reached the passage naming Catherine and stopped. His voice broke as he admitted that he had spent days believing his mother's final act was punishment. The princess did not interrupt him. The letter explained that Catherine had been selected because she defended Charlotte's future without seeking any advantage for herself. She had shown that she could hold family power independently of both the monarch and the direct heir. Elizabeth instructed her to consult Charles whenever possible, but never to surrender the trust simply to avoid conflict. She asked her son to see the arrangement not as displacement, but as protection for his descendants. Charles folded the letter and placed it between them. He apologized for asking Catherine to abandon the duty his mother had given her. She answered that she had never wanted the trust to become evidence against his reign. The monarch then made his decision. He would withdraw every legal objection and publicly recognize the trust's independence. Catherine offered him a permanent family advisory role, but no power to override the deed. Charles and Catherine left the room no longer fighting each other. Yet beyond the palace walls, the world was about to judge the Queen's decision without hearing the tears, the apology, or the promise that had finally changed everything. At sunrise, the private settlement became a national sensation. Broadcasters abandoned their planned schedules. Commentators argued over whether Catherine had become the most financially powerful woman in the modern royal family. Outside palace gates, supporters and critics gathered beneath competing signs. Yet one front page captured the public mood more powerfully than any debate. Catherine's composed face beside the words, "The Queen's final choice." The palace released a jointly authorized statement confirming that the princess was now the principal beneficiary and guardian of the independent royal trust. A principal beneficiary is the person legally placed at the center of an inheritance, with the strongest right to control and protect it. The announcement also confirmed that Charles accepted the arrangement, ending talk of a court challenge while hiding the private confrontation, the grief, and the apology that had brought him to that decision. London woke to the same image everywhere. A black and white photograph of Elizabeth appeared above a color portrait of Catherine, divided by a thin gold line. Across the page ran the headline, "The Queen's Final Choice. Catherine inherits royal fortune." The message was impossible to miss. One era had made a judgment about the next. A crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace. One woman held a photograph of the late monarch standing beside the future queen, while people around her argued over what the inheritance meant. Some called it tradition preserved through careful hands. Others called it power transferred away from the reigning king. The debate grew louder because the fortune was private, yet its meaning felt deeply public. William watched the coverage beside Catherine. When one presenter described her as the monarchy's new power behind the crown, she reached for the remote and turned off the television. The prince understood why. That phrase could reopen everything Charles and his wife had just struggled to repair. Camilla faced a harsher storm. Commentators repeatedly returned to her exclusion, treating every missing privilege as proof of rejection. She felt exposed, but the king refused to let palace officials answer through anonymous briefings. He would not allow Catherine to become the target of a campaign designed to protect his household. Then one sentence changed the tone. Charles had personally approved words describing Catherine's stewardship as an expression of continuity, trust, and service across generations. Instead of appearing defeated, the monarch began to look disciplined. He had placed unity above pride. The king called Catherine after the statement was released. He told her he would not allow the fortune to become a weapon against either of them. She promised that every decision would be judged by whether it protected the family, not whether it elevated her. The headlines declared a winner and a loser, but the final truth was more difficult, more human, and far more important than wealth, because the real verdict would be measured by what each of them chose to do after the shock had passed. In the end, Catherine kept the fortune, Charles kept the crown, and the monarchy survived the collision between them. But none emerged unchanged. The king had been forced to confront a decision that initially felt like his mother's final rejection. Catherine had been handed immense power under circumstances that threatened to isolate her. Their resolution came only when both stopped treating the trust as a prize and recognized it as Elizabeth's final test of character. Charles formally withdrew every proposed objection and ordered palace advisors to respect the trust's independence. No challenge was filed. No freeze was pursued. No attempt was made to weaken Catherine's authority. The Royal Trust, a private structure holding family wealth, heirlooms, estates, and protected assets outside the crown's official property, remained fully under her control. Catherine accepted the responsibility without celebration. Her first directive created protected future shares for George, Charlotte, and Louis, while preserving important collections for the wider family and the nation. She understood that trust did not place her above others. It required her to endure scrutiny, resist pressure, and protect people who might never see the sacrifices behind her decisions. Charles finally understood what his mother had done. She had not excluded him because he lacked love or duty. She had separated the fortune from the crown because royal office could overwhelm private judgment, even when intentions were honorable. The king had felt humiliated, but his decision to accept Elizabeth's command transformed that humiliation into dignity. William saw the inheritance differently too. The prince no longer viewed it as power gathered against his father. He saw it as a bridge, connecting the late Queen's reign, Charles's kingship, and the future awaiting their children. Camilla remained wounded by her exclusion, but she accepted that the deed could not be rewritten around her feelings. The monarch's defense of family unity stopped that pain from becoming another campaign of resentment. The final moment came before a private family gathering. Charles approached Catherine before anyone else arrived and handed her Elizabeth's letter, now sealed inside a protective case. He told her it belonged with the person entrusted to carry out its meaning. She accepted it with both hands. That gesture revealed the truth. The greatest inheritance was never the money. Elizabeth had divided authority so that no single royal figure, not even the sovereign, could control every part of the family's future. Catherine's position did not weaken the crown. It proved that the monarchy survived when trust followed character rather than title alone. There would be no appeal, no reversal, and no final act of retaliation. Only a king who accepted his mother's last command, a future queen who carried its burden, and a monarchy made stronger by the fortune that nearly tore it apart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.